I remember the exact moment everything started to change, even though at the time it felt like just another ordinary day. That's the strange thing about life, isn't it? The moments that break you or rebuild you never announce themselves. They arrive quietly, sit beside you, and before you realize it, they've already rewritten something deep inside you. My name is Nadine. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent most of my life building a version of myself that people respect. I'm a urologist, a specialist in male health, not exactly the easiest path for a woman to choose, especially in a world where people still look at you twice before they decide whether to take you seriously. But I never cared about easy. I never wanted comfort if it meant shrinking myself. I chose this field knowing exactly what it would demand from me: strength, discipline, and the ability to separate my emotions from my work. Or at least, that's what I believed. I wasn't always alone. I was married once, 7 years of what I thought was stability, until it slowly turned into something suffocating. I was 39 when it ended. People always assume something dramatic must have happened, but the truth is it was something much quieter and much more painful. My husband couldn't accept what I did for a living. He couldn't handle the idea that his wife spent her days dealing with men, listening to their most private concerns, examining what he believed should belong only to him. His jealousy wasn't loud at first. It crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching across a room. At first it was just questions, then doubts, then accusations, and eventually disrespect. "I'm your husband, not one of your patients," he once told me, his voice cold in a way I had never heard before. That sentence stayed with me longer than the marriage itself, because in that moment I realized he no longer saw me as a partner, just a problem. So I left. Since then, I've been living alone. My clinic is in the heart of the city, successful, respected, always busy. People come from far away just to sit in front of me for a few minutes, trusting me with things they wouldn't tell anyone else. And I take that responsibility seriously, very seriously. In my world, professionalism isn't optional, it's survival. Every morning I wake up early, make my coffee, review my schedule, and put on my white coat like armor, because that's what it is: protection, a barrier between who I am and who I allow the world to see. But underneath that coat, there's a silence I don't talk about, a kind of emptiness that doesn't scream, it just stays. That day started like any other. The clinic was running smoothly, appointments lined up perfectly, patients moving in and out like clockwork. I had already seen several cases by the afternoon, and honestly, I was just waiting for a short break so I could breathe for a moment. Then he walked in. He looked to be in his early 30s, calm on the outside, but his eyes told a different story. They moved around the room carefully, like he was trying to make sure he was safe, like he needed to confirm that whatever he was about to say wouldn't be used against him. I greeted him the way I greet everyone: calm, neutral, professional. He sat down, hesitated for a second, then let out a quiet breath. "Doctor, I don't think I have a physical problem," he said. That caught my attention. Most men don't start like that. They come in with symptoms, complaints, something concrete. But he came in with uncertainty. "I'm getting married soon," he continued, his voice steady but heavy. "And I'm scared." I leaned slightly forward, not too much, just enough to show I was listening. "Scared of what?" I asked gently. He paused, and in that pause, I felt something shift. "Scared of the relationship itself," he said, "of being close, of failing, of hurting her without meaning to." I had heard similar fears before. It's not uncommon, but something about the way he said it wasn't surface-level anxiety, it was deeper,
rooted in something unresolved. So I guided him, like I always do, back toward clarity, asked the usual questions, tried to bring it into a medical framework. But then he said something that made me go still. "This isn't new," he admitted quietly. "Something happened in the past. Someone I was with before. She made me feel like there was something wrong with me, like I wasn't enough." There it was. Not a physical issue, a wound. And suddenly, this wasn't just another consultation. I kept my expression steady, but inside, something moved. Because his words didn't belong to him, they echoed in places I had carefully locked away. I asked him to take his time, even though something inside me wanted him to hurry. It wasn't impatience, it was closer to anticipation, like I already knew his story was going to touch something I wasn't ready to face. "My name is Adam," he said quietly, as if introducing himself properly might somehow make what he was about to say easier. I nodded, writing it down, keeping my movements controlled. "Go on, Adam." He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "I was engaged before," he began. "It was serious. We were close, maybe too close, too fast. And at first, everything felt normal. But then she started saying things, small things, that I was different, that something about me didn't feel right." I stayed silent, giving him space. "She didn't explain it clearly," he continued, his voice tightening slightly. "Just reactions, pulling away sometimes, looking at me like she was confused, like I was doing something wrong without even knowing what it was."
I had heard versions of this before. Miscommunication, mismatched expectations, emotional disconnect. But the way he carried it, it hadn't faded. It had stayed with him, grown heavier over time. And then one day, he said, his eyes lowering again, she told me she couldn't go through with it, that she didn't feel comfortable, that she didn't think we were compatible in that way. That way. He didn't need to explain further. "And since then?" I asked softly. He let out a small, humorless breath. "Since then, I feel like I'm broken in a way I can't see, like there's something wrong with me that no test can detect. And now that I'm about to get married again, I'm terrified it's going to happen all over again." There was no arrogance in his tone, no defensiveness, just honesty and fear. And something about that honesty slipped past my professional barriers, because I knew what it felt like to be seen as the problem without fully understanding why. I straightened slightly, grounding myself. "Adam," I said, my voice steady, "what you're describing doesn't automatically mean there's something physically wrong. A lot of these experiences are shaped by communication, emotional safety, expectations, not just biology." He nodded, but I could tell my words hadn't reached the part of him that needed them most. "That's what I keep telling myself," he replied, "but it doesn't change the feeling." Of course it didn't. Feelings don't respond to logic the way we want them to. I wrote a few notes down, more out of habit than necessity, then looked back at him. "We'll approach this from both sides," I said. "I'll run a basic evaluation to rule out anything physical, just to give you reassurance. But I'd also strongly recommend speaking to a therapist. What you're carrying isn't just about your body, it's about what that experience did to your confidence." He looked at me for a moment, really looked this time, like he was measuring something in my expression. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. "You can." "How do you stay unaffected?" he asked. "You hear things like this all the time. You deal with people's fears, their insecurities, their private struggles. How do you not carry it with you?" The question caught me off guard, because the honest answer was, I did. I carried it. I just never showed it. I focus on helping, I said carefully. That creates a boundary. It keeps things where they belong. He held my gaze for a second longer, then gave a small nod, as if he accepted the answer, even if he sensed it wasn't the whole truth. All right, I said, standing up slightly. Let's do a basic examination, just to be thorough. He agreed without hesitation. Everything about the situation should have felt routine, familiar, controlled. I had done this hundreds of times before. The same steps, the same professional distance, the same practiced calm. But something was different. I could feel it before I even put on the gloves. When I returned and began the examination, I kept my movements precise, clinical, detached. My voice remained steady as I explained each step, maintaining the structure that had always kept me grounded. But his reaction wasn't typical. At first it was subtle, a slight shift in his breathing, then a visible release of tension in his shoulders. His eyes closed for a brief moment, not in discomfort, but in something closer to relief. I paused internally, but not externally. "Are you okay?" I asked, still maintaining my tone. "Yes," he said quietly. "Actually, I feel calm." Calm. That word lingered. "It's strange," he added, opening his eyes again. "I was expecting to feel anxious, but I don't. I feel safe." Safe. I finished the examination without reacting, stepping back, removing my gloves, placing everything exactly where it belonged. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But inside, something had shifted. Because I had felt it too. Not physically, but emotionally. A subtle break in the wall I had spent years building. "That's a good sign," I said, returning to my seat. "It suggests your body isn't responding from fear, which means what you're dealing with is very likely psychological, not physical." He sat up, adjusting himself, but his expression had softened. "Thank you," he said, and this time there was something deeper in it. Not just for the examination, for the way you handled it. I gave a small, controlled smile. "That's my job." He shook his head slightly. "No, not everyone does it like that." There was a pause, a quiet one, and in that silence I became aware of something I didn't like. The room didn't feel as neutral as it should have. I cleared my throat lightly, breaking the moment. "You'll be fine, Adam. Just don't carry this fear into your new relationship. Be present, communicate, and most importantly, don't assume the past will repeat itself." He stood up, nodding. "I'll try," he said. He walked toward the door, then stopped for a brief second, as if considering whether to say something else. But he didn't. He just gave me one last look and left. The door closed quietly behind him. And just like that, the room returned to silence. Or at least it should have. But something of him remained. I sat there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at nothing in particular. Then I exhaled slowly, deeper than I intended. It was just another patient. That's what I told myself. Just another story. Just another case. But the truth was, it didn't feel like one. And for the first time in years, I couldn't immediately put my emotional walls back into place. Something had slipped through, and I didn't know how to close the door again. For the rest of that day, I tried to move on like nothing had happened,
Patient after patient walked into my office, each with their own story, their own concerns, their own need for reassurance. And I gave them exactly what I always gave: focus, professionalism, solutions. But something was off. It wasn't obvious from the outside. If anyone had looked at me, they would have seen the same composed doctor, the same steady voice, the same controlled expressions. But inside, my thoughts kept drifting back to him, to Adam. Not in a way I wanted, not in a way I welcomed. It was more like a question that refused to settle, a feeling I couldn't fully define. I had spent years training myself to separate my personal life from my work. It wasn't just discipline, it was survival. In my field, boundaries aren't optional, they're everything. The moment those lines blur, you risk losing more than just your reputation. You risk losing yourself. And yet, something about that session had crossed a line I couldn't clearly redraw. That night, I went home later than usual. The apartment was exactly as I had left it: quiet, clean, untouched. I placed my keys on the table, took off my shoes, and stood there for a moment in the silence. Usually, I found comfort in that silence. That night, it felt heavier. I made myself a cup of tea instead of coffee, thinking maybe something warm would calm my mind. I sat on the couch, trying to distract myself with meaningless television, but I wasn't really watching. My thoughts were replaying moments. Not the entire conversation, just fragments. The way he hesitated before speaking, the honesty in his voice, the way he said he felt safe. Safe. That word came back again, and it did something unexpected to me. Because I couldn't remember the last time someone had used that word in my presence, not as a patient, but as a person. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a second, and that's when something uncomfortable surfaced. A memory, not of him, of my ex-husband. "Cold," he used to say. "You're cold like a machine." I opened my eyes immediately, as if I could push the memory away just by refusing to sit in it.
But it didn't leave. Because for the first time, I wasn't rejecting it. I was questioning it. Was I really cold? Or had I just adapted? I stood up abruptly, walking toward the mirror without really thinking. I looked at my reflection, studying it like I would study a patient, objectively, carefully. I saw a woman who looked put together, controlled, strong. But I also saw something else: distance. From others. From herself. I looked away. That night, sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it wasn't restful. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. Outwardly, everything remained the same. The clinic was busy, my schedule was full, my routine intact. But internally, there was a quiet tension I couldn't shake. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way I spoke, always measured. The way I avoided eye contact just a second too early. The way I never allowed conversations to linger beyond what was necessary. It wasn't just professionalism. It was protection. And I had been hiding behind it for so long, I didn't even realize it anymore. A week passed, then another. I told myself I had moved on, that whatever that moment was, it had faded. Until he came back. It was unexpected. No appointment, no prior notice. The receptionist knocked lightly on my door. "Doctor, there's someone asking to see you. He said it's not urgent, but he'd really appreciate a few minutes." I almost said no. Almost. But something in me hesitated. "Who is it?" I asked. She checked quickly. Adam. That name. It landed differently this time. I paused for just a second too long, then said, "Send him in." The moment he walked through the door, I felt it again. That same subtle shift in the air. He looked calmer than before, more grounded, but there was still something in his eyes. Something searching. "I'm sorry for coming without an appointment. I won't take much of your time." "It's fine," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "What's on your mind?" He sat down, but instead of speaking immediately, he looked at me for a moment, like he was deciding how honest he could be. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about not letting the past control my future." I nodded slightly. "That's good." "And I started opening up more," he continued, "with my fiancé, talking about things I was avoiding before." "That's important," I said. "Communication changes everything." "It does," he agreed, "but that's not why I'm here." Of course it wasn't. I could feel that already. "I realized something," he said, his voice quieter now. "That day, it wasn't just what you said that helped me." I didn't respond. I just listened. "It was how you made me feel," he added. There it was again, that word, unspoken but present. Safe. I felt a slight tightening in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. "Adam," I said carefully, "it's important to understand that—" He interrupted gently. I know this is your job. I'm not misunderstanding anything. I just needed to say it." His tone wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't crossing a line directly, but it was standing very close to it. And somehow, that made it more dangerous. I've never felt that kind of calm before, not even with someone I loved. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a brief moment, I forgot to be just the doctor. "I'm glad you felt supported," I said, choosing my words carefully. He smiled faintly. "It was more than that." Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt heavier, more personal, less controlled. "I should go," he said suddenly, standing up. "I didn't mean to take up your time." I nodded, even though part of me felt like something unfinished was hanging in the air. As he turned to leave, he paused again, and this time he didn't stay silent. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I hesitated, but I didn't stop him. "Do you ever get tired of always being the strong one?" The question hit deeper than I expected, and for a second, I didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to be anything else anymore. For a moment, I didn't answer him, not because I didn't hear the question, but because I felt it, deeply. It wasn't the kind of question you respond to automatically. It wasn't clinical or surface level, or something you could deflect with professionalism. It went somewhere personal, somewhere I had avoided for years. "Do you ever get tired of always being the strong one?" I looked at him, and for the first time since he had walked into my clinic, I felt something shift inside me in a way I couldn't control. "Yes," I said, quietly. The word came out before I could stop it. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't measured. It was real.
and the moment it left my lips, I felt exposed. Adam didn't react immediately. He didn't smile, didn't move closer, didn't say anything that would make the moment inappropriate. He just nodded slowly, like he understood more than I had actually said. That made it even more dangerous, because understanding creates connection, and connection creates risk. "I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable," he said gently. "You didn't," I replied, but my voice wasn't as steady as before. "You just asked a question most people don't think to ask." He gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Maybe because most people assume strong people don't need to be asked." That sentence lingered in the air between us. I didn't respond, because I didn't trust myself to. There was a silence that followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of thoughts, of emotions, of things neither of us was saying.
And that silence was pulling me somewhere I knew I shouldn't go. I straightened slightly, trying to bring myself back. "Adam," I said, returning to a more controlled tone, "it's important that we keep things clear between us. You came here for help, and I'm here to provide that, nothing more." There it was, the boundary. Spoken out loud, clear, necessary, late. He didn't seem offended. If anything, he looked understanding. "I know," he said, "and I respect that." Of course he did. That's what made this harder. Because he wasn't pushing, he wasn't crossing the line, he was simply standing near it. "I just wanted to thank you, properly." "You already did," I replied. "Not like this," he said softly. Again that tone, not inappropriate, but not entirely neutral either, and something in me responded to it. I hated that, because I had spent years building control, and now, in a matter of days, I could feel that control shifting. "Take care of yourself, Adam," I said, signaling the end of the conversation. He nodded. This time, when he turned to leave, he didn't stop. He walked out quietly, and just like that, I was alone again. But the room didn't feel the same. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the door after it closed. My hands were still resting on the desk, but I wasn't aware of them. All I could feel was the echo of that question. "Do you ever get tired?" I leaned back slowly in my chair, exhaling as if I had been holding my breath without realizing it. What was happening to me? This wasn't about him. It couldn't be. It was about something else, something deeper, something unresolved. That evening, I didn't go straight home. I stayed at the clinic longer than necessary, pretending to organize files, reviewing cases I had already completed, anything to delay the moment I would be alone with my thoughts. But eventually, there was nothing left to do, so I left. The drive home felt longer than usual. The city lights blurred slightly as I moved through familiar streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. When I entered my apartment, the silence greeted me again, but this time it felt louder. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't make tea. I just stood there, in the middle of the room, and let myself feel it, the confusion, the discomfort, the truth. Because the truth was, this wasn't about Adam. He didn't create something new. He revealed something that was already there. The loneliness I had learned to ignore, the emotional distance I had convinced myself was strength, the part of me that had slowly gone quiet until I stopped hearing it altogether. I walked to the mirror again, and this time I didn't look away. "Who are you?" I whispered softly, not expecting an answer, but something inside me responded anyway. Not in words, in feeling.
A realization that came slowly but hit deeply. I wasn't cold. I wasn't broken. I wasn't incapable of connection. I was disconnected from myself, from my needs, from the part of me that wanted something more than just control. And that realization, it scared me, because if that part of me was still there, then everything I had built to protect myself was also keeping me trapped. I closed my eyes briefly, pressing my hand lightly against the edge of the table. This wasn't just a moment. This was a shift, a crack in something I believed was solid. And once something cracks, it doesn't go back to the way it was. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Not because I couldn't,
But because I knew, if I allowed myself to rest, I might wake up unchanged. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I wanted that. The next morning felt different. Not because anything around me had changed, but because I had. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable from the outside. The same routine, the same quiet apartment, the same coffee slowly cooling in my hands. But inside, there was something unsettled, not chaotic, just no longer still. For years I had built my life on certainty, clear boundaries, clear roles. I was the doctor, the strong one, the composed one, the one who understood others but never allowed herself to be understood. And now, that identity didn't feel as solid as it once did. I went to the clinic as usual, wearing the same white coat that had always felt like protection. But that day, it felt heavier, not because it had changed, but because I started to feel what was underneath it. The day moved forward like any other. Patients came and went, stories were told, advice was given, and I played my role perfectly. But something had shifted in the way I listened. I wasn't just hearing symptoms anymore. I was hearing emotions, fear behind confidence, silence behind words. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't separating myself from it completely. It was as if a part of me had woken up. Not fully, but enough to notice. Days passed. Adam didn't come back, and I told myself that was a good thing. It meant everything was back where it belonged. But the truth was, something had already moved, and it wasn't going back. About 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my office when I received an email. It wasn't unusual. I get messages from patients all the time, follow-ups, questions, appreciation. But something about this one caught my attention. It was longer than usual, more personal. I opened it. "Hello, Dr. Nadine. I'm Alia, Adam's wife. I just wanted to thank you, truly. Before he came to you, he was struggling in ways he didn't fully understand. He was distant sometimes, anxious, unsure of himself. I could feel it, but I didn't know how to reach him. After his visit with you, something changed. He started opening up, talking, sharing fears he had been hiding, even from himself. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in the relationship. We started building something real, something honest. You didn't just help him medically, you helped him emotionally, and because of that, you helped us. I don't know exactly what you said to him, but whatever it was, it mattered. Thank you for giving us a chance to start our life the right way. I wish you happiness in your work and in your life. Alia." I read the message once, then again, and then I just sat there. There was warmth in those words, gratitude, relief, proof that I had done something meaningful, and under normal circumstances that would have been enough. But that day it wasn't, because alongside that warmth there was something else, a quiet ache. Not because I wanted what they had, but because I realized I had forgotten what that felt like. Connection, honesty, being seen without needing to be perfect. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time I allowed myself to sit in that feeling without pushing it away. This wasn't regret, it wasn't longing, it was awareness, a realization that I had spent so much time protecting myself from pain, that I had also protected myself from life, from closeness, from vulnerability, from everything that makes something real. Adam came into my life as a patient, but he left behind something else, a mirror, one that showed me parts of myself I'd stopped looking at, the fear of being misunderstood, the habit of emotional distance, the quiet loneliness I had accepted as normal, but also the possibility of change. Because the truth is, nothing inappropriate truly happened. No lines were crossed beyond what could be pulled back. No decisions were made that couldn't be understood. What happened was simpler and deeper. Two people recognized something in each other, and for a brief moment allowed themselves to feel it. And that moment was enough. Enough to awaken something, enough to question everything, enough to remind me that I was still human. I closed the email slowly, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to move on. I didn't hide behind my routine. I didn't silence the feeling. I just sat there, breathing, thinking, understanding. Strength isn't about shutting everything down. It's not about becoming untouchable. It's not about living behind walls so high that nothing can reach you. Real strength is balance, is knowing where your boundaries are, but not losing your humanity inside them. I stood up slowly, walking towards the mirror in my office. I looked at myself, not as a doctor, not as a role, but as a person, and this time I recognized her. Not perfect, not unbreakable, but real, and maybe that was enough, because at the end of the day, before you are anything else, before the title, before the responsibility, before the expectations, you are human, and no matter how strong you become, your heart still needs warmth, just like anyone else.